go. Hey, forgive us all. I think we missed our first weekly episode last week,
maybe
with a little bit of turmoil getting AEP kicking off, and then I was off in Florida with a swamp adventure.
Yeah, but I don't feel too bad about it because there's been a lot of weeks we've doubled up though too and delivered 2 or 3 episodes. So I don't.
Oh yeah, we've been consistent. So we got our new Jamie. Nico's always been the backup Jamie for the podcast. So happy to have Nico on the mics.
Yep, exactly. I feel very confident that we'll be able to continue just rolling. So, and speaking of which, we are in search of a new content creator. So if you're interested.
Our other guy got a job too good to pass up in
Austin.
I don't know if it was the job, but he was just able to link up with his girlfriend. Long distance relationships don't generally work. Shout out, Matt.
Yeah. So I hope he's well. He's in Austin, loving life. So anyhow, lot to go through, lot to talk about. I think we should go through. Let's hash out like some current affairs, headlines, things that are happening right now before we get into like the conversation.
Yeah, it seemed like the prior couple of weeks, right, leading up to AEP, industry news was kind of a little bit slower than it had been all year. And then just this week, there's been a lot of stuff dropping. And I think just like us, now that AEP or at least pre-AEP is kicked off,
right,
there's a lot of like announcements and things and launches and things that have been kind of put off that now people can focus on talking about and kind of rolling out again.
Yeah, I also would tell you that things, like we've known, everything feels late. Everything feels rushed. Everything feels a little bit thrown together, and it is a little bit chaotic this year. We've experienced it to some degree too. Like we've talked about it previously, where you would have a longer horizon to plan, prepare, and execute, and now you're doing something that took 2 months and you're having to do it in 2 weeks. So
yep,
very little margin of error too. I feel like, we hear like that term thread the needle, and everything with finance or economics or other things, but it seems like this year we're having to thread the needle 6 times to kind of get to a desirable outcome, which...
Yeah, everything just feels, the launch of AEP, everything feels a little bit like clunky, a little bit less sure than things have been in the past. We literally just got very important information from Aetna and Humana just recently. People are really finding out where those SARs actually were, right at the same time that we're getting pre-AEP.
Right, I would even shout out to UHC that they did a phenomenal job in sending out an email and saying, hey, everybody, this is where you'll go in your Jarvis portal to see all the impacted H numbers, and this is how you're going to identify that and know what's in, so you can obviously match up. So when we talk about an H number or like a PBP, we're talking about the contract number of every plan with CMS.
Also known as a HICN, H-I-C-N.
Correct. And so like you have... all these insurance companies that have hundreds or thousands of these HICN contract numbers with CMS. And as we've been talking about all the disruption this year, certain ones were determined to just be exiting the market entirely. And then other areas of the country. So we kind of broke it down and said, okay, which footprints and which products is the carrier completely and entirely leaving a market? And then there was another layer to that of saying, which areas are they just sunsetting or exiting that particular plan, but they're introducing a new plan that, they do have coverage available to consumers, but it's not a crosswalk or not a passive enrollment. So meaning that us as like the distribution partner or the agent needs to write the new policy in order to retain or keep that member. So it's been a big exercise for us to go through and contact each carrier partner, get the actual codes of the HICNs or the H numbers that are going away, and then being able to cross-reference that to our book of business and identify those impacted members. So, and that's obviously something that's the recipe, that's the formula for you as agents. That's what you should have done. And if you haven't, there's still time. You could certainly do that and go match those HICNs up to your book of business to identify major impacts. Because again, that SAR letter, you don't get CC'd or copied on as the agent. They just send it out to the consumer. So you're kind of in the dark. You got to do a little bit of legwork there.
Yeah, it also seems like, even though we've been talking about it all year, the Inflation Reduction Act is really throwing consumers and agents for a loop a little bit. And agents are still trying to figure out how to actually calculate how and when and if agents are going to hit that 2,000 cap, because you know, just the way that they're calculating it is going to be different. And so depending on how and when you're paying those stages of that money, people may pay slightly less than that actual 2,000 out of pocket. So agents are just still trying to wrap their head around that and figure that out as well.
It's not same. And to your point, like when you really start diving into how that's calculated, it wasn't explained very clearly to really anybody. And I think there's videos out there floating around the internet, other people trying to describe how it works. But, you know, one consumer's experience is going to be different from another consumer's experience. And what's we always talk about is you want to have something that's stupid, like simple, stupid, easy, scalable, you know, replicatable. And it's really hard to implement a policy like that and then have millions of people and then have different tabulations or calculations as to whether they're going to hit the $2,000. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. I would say, I think that's a big failure on the way that they're calculating the Inflation Reduction Act right now.
Yeah. So overall, you know, we'll wrap up with kind of our initial impressions on AEP, but
yeah, let's talk headlines first a little bit too.
Yeah. And I think our behind the scenes conversations this week is overall, it's looking like the Medicare horizon is still looking rough for 2026 already. And, you know, it's very interesting that the longer you've been in this business, we pretty much know how we're going to do for AEP right now. Like I wrote a number on my board of how many enrollments that we're going to do, our virtual team. And I bet I'd be willing to bet a lot that I'm within 5%.
I am always within 10% margin on revenue too when we're looking at it.
Yeah. So already we start looking at next year, right? And
I want to talk more about that. I want to talk about how we model out and how we calculate run rates and how that works and how we manage that throughout AEP. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk some quick headlines first before we get into like the meat and potatoes of it. I was reading through, and like I said, if you haven't noticed, I'm a geek, I'm a nerd, that's okay. I self-proclaimed. I mean, when I have free time, you catch me reading articles on KFF or, you know, signing up for Optum webinars and finding out how V28 is going to be calculated. And I mean, those are
Dan and I are sending each other healthcare industry articles, you know, and updates late at night.
Yeah. I mean, so it's just different. I'm a self-proclaimed nerd, but a couple headlines that grab my attention is, you know, Aetna I want to talk about. They just went through another round of about 3,000-ish layoffs just this last week. So here we are. And the feedback from some of the brokers that we've had interactions with is like, oh crap, it's October 1st, and I tried to call so-and-so and they don't even work there. You know, it's just the timing was really bad because, you know,
2 of them work here.
Yeah, well, no, this was another round. Yeah. So, I mean, I think Karen Lynch, their CEO, she announced that they would be doing like over 5,000, you know, and they in different rounds and waves. But yeah, but the timing of it was just unfortunate because it's that time of year where, as we all know, there's a lot of brokers who are disengaged throughout the year, and then suddenly they're like, okay, now I'm really excited to start selling again. I need to contact my local so-and-so. And so surprise, they don't work there. So just the timing was bad. That was all.
Aetna also was making headlines, you know, rumors that CVS is trying to split ways again or potentially explore ways of maybe cutting off Aetna. I thought that was very interesting as well. So,
well, because if you really follow their financials too, Aetna was the piece of CVS that was kind of really dragging down their financials, right? So I think they're just looking forward, to your point, trying to take ways to segment that off.
It's interesting that just a couple of years ago when, you know, MA was operating in a non-realistic space where the money was flowing free and easy and there was no oversights and repercussions, and the money, COVID money was flowing and all that. It was like, hey, let's acquire it and to the moon. And now the landscape has changed so quickly that now it's like, oh, it's almost like a depreciating asset or a losing asset right now. And they're looking at ways to maybe explore that. And I just think that's just another one of these canaries in the coal mine that are basically, you know, signaling that, that it's going to be a little bit tricky for the next 2 or 3 years at least in the Medicare space. So, and not just the Medicare Advantage space, but, you know, the health insurance industry in general, the healthcare providers, you know, there's some challenges and some headwinds all across the board.
Everywhere. Yeah. And it all comes down to, I mean, there's pressure on those medical providers when their reimbursement rates were extremely high and they didn't have very much utilization. Like if you were a provider group, like, you know, the Kanos were victim of that too, you know, where you're on these PMPM payments for value-based care and you're actually not having to do a whole lot of it during those COVID years. Your profits, of course, are like way high. And then suddenly, like, you know, there's a lot more oversight, like on payments. It's getting squeezed or cut a little bit, and then you have more access of care and utilization. You know, like it changes the whole dynamic and the whole formula. And I will say too, the one thing that I always remember is, hey, it's great though. A lot of these carriers are going to have to run leaner. You know, they really were. I don't want to say that they're bloated. You know, an Aetna, a Cigna, Humana, United Healthcare, any of these big carriers. You know, while they're in these growth modes, like you're talking about, these business cycles of, you know, huge revenue growth and expansion areas and everything else, and they're having to staff in all these people. And now we're kind of like on that, you know, either they're trying to hold the line or they're trying to dial it back a little bit for profitability. They're adjusting their sales force, right? And they're having to lay off all these people. So that just makes us as like an FMO and distributor, again, more valuable, because you're just going to find that a lot of these carriers just don't have as much resource from the perspective of human capital to help and support brokers and hold their hands. But I go back to it and go, I don't mind it, because we have the connections and the resources that we need at those carriers. They make sure to provide us with the national, the AEs, the reps, the tools and the support that we need to do our jobs. And that's what we like to do, is to support our sales distribution. And that's the way that whole model runs.
Yeah, it definitely feels like for the past couple of years, there was some bloat, especially with some carriers where you're going, really, how many broker managers do you need in that area, and mid-level management and things like that? So you can definitely see how, you know, sharpening the pencil would make sense for them in that regard.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one takeaway that I think is very, you know, it's very palpable, that brokers can very much feel it. But I'm just here to tell you, if you're an independent agent out there doing this, again, you are expected to be the marketing department, to be the compliance department, to be the you know, the sales and marketing department, to be the enrollment department, the QA department, you know, you are that independent broker, and you're supposed to do all these things yourself. And so any tools and support and things that the carriers give you, that's an added bonus. You know, that's great. Just thank your lucky stars that you have all these things to help you grow your business. Back in my day, when we walked up, you know, the hills, you know, when you went to school with gunny sacks wrapped around our feet
in the snow,
uphill
both ways.
That's how it was, man. I couldn't log into a portal and see like my pretty book of business right there and see all like my licenses and where I was. I was running like spreadsheets, tracking everything with dates, and
we had credenzas with.
I had to track everything, and nowadays it's like
paper.
I still scratch my head and go,
file cabinets.
How is it that you're not managing your book of business when all you have to do is log in and see the information that's right there? Wow, that would have been a game changer for me.
Also, just writing the business and crossing your fingers and hope it works out and getting paid on it is also
not a good strategy. Right.
Go figure.
I know. So anyways, that is the one thing that I will tell you. I think that the broker community at large has become very spoiled, very loved, with a lot of opportunities, with a lot of technology, with a lot of great innovations over these last couple of years. And I just am going to continue to, and I think if you really have behind the scene conversations with a lot of carriers, they're like, hey, we expect more out of independent agents, and that we're paying a lot in commissions, and we're paying a lot to distributors, and we're paying a lot to have these services performed for our members. And I think that that's what they're wanting to see, is like, hey, as margins keep getting tight, we want to see them step up and deliver and do a great job for us.
Yeah, I think the agent pool, agent population has been a little bit tainted over the past 4 or 5, 6 years, because most new agents, and the industry's really been flooded by teledigital agents who have been brought into the industry and licensed by big e-brokers and call centers and things like that. And then they at some point decide that they want to go independent, and they go out into the marketplace. Correct. And they just frankly don't have the skill sets, but they also don't have a full understanding of the industry that they got into. They've been in an environment where everything was taken care of for them, from a contracting department to a licensing department, to where they basically had to show up and right. Click ready to call and start receiving inbound calls. So they have a very many of those agents have a disproportionate expectation
Right.
of what the industry actually takes. And we see that all the time, that, you know, a lot of agents that we onboard that have been in that environment, despite how many great lengths we go to describe the reality of the situation, they still are very green to understanding the realities of becoming an independent agent.
Well, I think they're very expectant for somebody else to solve their problem, right? And I think they become a little skewed because, to your point, they don't understand the millions and millions of dollars that have been invested into building out all that infrastructure that they've had, that they've enjoyed. And then they kind of were like, yeah, I'm actually really proficient and I understand how to sell Medicare. Now I'm really good at it, and I've sold hundreds of plans. So now I'm just going to go freelance and do it as an independent.
Yeah, in the supply chain on the assembly line, you were just the guy standing there putting the piece together and sending it on down. Now you've got to do, you know, much more of the whole piece of the equation overall.
Right.
So
and now you've got to be really organized. You've got to be very disciplined, and you've got to understand all those different elements and pieces and have a plan to solve it. And you've got to have the capital, and you've got to have, I mean, yeah, to that point, they've had one element of maybe 10 elements that they need to have to succeed. And so I think
we could go on and on and on that forever about, you know, how to be a better agent, and we do at times. Let's, you know, kind of circle back to the
you mentioned e-telebrokers, so let's segue into that one.
Yeah, looks like Go Health just wrapped up officially that acquisition of e-telequote. So you know, we're hoping, actually, we have friends all over the industry, including at the big e-telebrokers, and we're hoping to get you know, don't want to tip the hand too much, but hoping to have somebody from one of our friends from one of the big e-telebrokers on and kind of talk about, you know, the evolution that they've had to go through over the past few years and kind of like where they're at and what the direction is, and talk a little bit about that acquisition as well. Yeah,
and I would say that I think our perspective is unique. Everyone has their own viewpoint, right, and their own context, and I think ours is different because we have relationships with feet on the street agents, we have with field agents, with teledigital agents, with sub-agency partners. We have a different perspective and relationship with the carriers, and even with our peers in the space, with other FMOs and e-telebrokers. And so, you know, we get a lot of the behind the scenes dialogue of here's what's really happening, here's what's going on. And I think that we've tried to, through the podcast, bring some of that context to the marketplace so that people better understand it. And I think ultimately, even at the villainous, terrible e-call brokers, you know, it's maybe not always as bad as it's been perceived or painted. And I think that there's a lot of some accurate information, but also some misinformation out there on these e-telebrokers. And it's kind of would be great to have them on and talk more about, I don't want to say like the tell-all, but like to really go through more of the business evolution that they've gone through over the years and where they've landed.
Well, and most of that leadership, you know, for all of the e-telebrokers, that when it was, you know, let's just call it in the heyday, when it was the rise of the Joe Namath churn and burn, and that was really kind of the MO of the day. None of that leadership is there. None of that.
Don't worry. They're probably doing ACA now, Mike. Don't worry. They just hurried and like stopped doing Joe Namath.
They took
bait and switch.
Those lead vendors. Yeah, they took one hat off and
they moved to Florida or Texas, and they, you know, just spun up business again and started doing ACA fraud. You know,
South Florida, I bet.
Sorry, taking shots, everybody. If you're in Florida running one of those shitty, scummy call centers, shots fired. Anyways,
you just described half of them.
Only half? Only half? I would also say, going back to that e-telequote divestiture.
Hey, we have a call, for the record, we have a call center in South Florida too. Except ours is good. We're the good guys.
Exactly.
We call it it's a virtual brokerage.
Hey,
but
Tampa is not South Florida.
Pretty sure it's at least, it's South Florida. I'm going to consider it South Florida.
Maybe we'll get comments, and some of us are like, "You guys don't even know what you're talking about."
Yeah, but we do have a facility. Our other headquarters is in Tampa, so sure.
But I will also tell you that's how I happen to know, because we are in the market, so I happen to know. Anyways.
Well, yeah, and we do get people that get beguiled and get convinced of all these scammy deals down there.
That's what I'm saying.
We have agents and reps down there, and like, this guy promised me this, and you're like, okay.
Yeah,
good luck with that.
This guy promised me he has all these leads that he took from his prior employer, and they're just going to hand them to me to dial on and steal. No, that does not sound like a great opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
Good luck with that, my friend. But I will say, going back to the e-telequote, the reason I think it's important is that if you go back a few years, we've already seen assurance kind of make a market exit this year. And that's been impactful. If you're like us and you're a distributor, you've seen this agent population being displaced and having to go and land somewhere. And from that, you're seeing that these assurance agents are basically looking for exactly what they had at Assurance, and it doesn't exist, a lot of them. And so it's been somewhat disruptive in trying to have those conversations and explain, here's how the real world works and here's how the opportunities are in the marketplace. And then now that you're having eTeleQuote be consolidated into Go Health now, you're just seeing that's already 2 of the e-brokers just vanishing this year. So I think it's very impactful. I mean, you're really left with, as far as the bigs, you have Go Health, eHealth, and SelectQuote, and those are kind of the bigs. And
Willis
then from
Towers,
there,
Watson, Select.
Yeah, and you have Connection Point. So you have a handful of them around, but Ann Hewitt is also, notable. I think they're part of Willis Towers now. But so you're just seeing all this consolidation happening. You don't have 10 mega e-brokers anymore. You're down to 3 or 4. So
yeah, it's interesting with the assurance agents, because when a lot of them came out, a lot of their leadership or supervisors all had kind of delusions of grandeur, and we ended up talking with a lot of them. They'd kind of banded together in these groups of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 agents, and they had very, very, I'll call them unrealistic expectations or demands of what they thought that they were going to be able to, your team, when you have everything done and all these leads provided for, and you're just taking inbound call after inbound call, number one is very, very cost intensive. And the financial dynamics of that obviously weren't working out, or they wouldn't have been, looking for other opportunities anyway. And so we actually passed on quite a few different groups like that, and I'd be interested to hear how those are doing. So if any of you groups, that have left insurance are out there that are now thriving, just from a standpoint of curiosity, hope you're doing well. But I'm just wondering, reach out to us. Let us know what you're doing and how it worked out for you, because I'm curious.
I would like to hear both sides of it, to be honest. I would like to hear from the brokers who were like, well, you know what? Yeah, you guys were reasonable with me and turned me down and wouldn't give me the moon. And I went somewhere else, and guess what? They lied to me and didn't deliver, right? I would like to hear that side of it.
That's really what I wanted to say.
And then I also would like to hear our kind of peers in the industry who are like, you know what? We kind of got scammed because these agents promised that they would write X amount of business and do all this stuff, and we fronted them cash and gave them all these things and held up our end of the deal, and we got burned too. So it kind of goes both ways. We're pretty conservative. I would admit that, maybe to a fault myself personally. Pretty conservative. I mean, if something's reasonable, we do it, but anything beyond reason, we just don't do that. With agents and agencies. If somebody's like, you make me the best offer and throw in the kitchen sink, we're just not interested.
Well, I mean, there's something to be said for slow, sustainable, quality, good growth over time, which is what we've done. And I had a business meeting with somebody yesterday, and that's what he said. He said, hey, when you go fast and you have money and you can scale, you only have to be right once very quickly,
right?
But when you do it, year after year after year, that's talent. That takes, wisdom and intelligence. So I appreciated that feedback as well.
Yep. And I would say lastly, just before we move on from the eTeleQuote and the acquisition there, I would say if you follow, I always like to give shouts out to people that we know in the industry that we like, that we're friendly with too. Telos, Jared did a good analysis, Jared Strock, of the deal. And he made the note too, saying that on the surface, if you really add those two together, and he has a breakdown of their different financials, and then if you were to combine them, but then also the one note that he made was that on the surface, it would actually decrease their operating profit by having those two together. So, I mean, it's obvious that you wouldn't really want to make a deal and then be less profitable. And so obviously there's going to be some changes, consolidation, efficiencies, some other reasoning that we're not privy to or that we don't see that has to be there somehow, or else they probably wouldn't have made that deal. So I'm sure that there will be more details forthcoming on that, but I just thought that was of note or of interest to me at least.
Yeah. So the other big, news topic out there this week was the fact that Humana basically is going from, what was it, 94%?
So 94% of their plans, in the calendar year 2024 were 4-star or higher.
And now they're going down to only 25% of those for for 2025, and their stock basically dropped by 20%. They had an earlier precipitous drop like that earlier in the year when they talked about some of the stars and headwinds and their MLRs. And so Humana stock is definitely taking a beating this year.
Yeah, but I would say the one thing that I do like, and I appreciate this about Humana, and I think from their, like, even as an investor in other stocks and even in Humana stock, I like the fact that, so star ratings come out next week. By the time people are hearing this,
everybody will basically have their star ratings.
Yeah, so this coming week, right now it's October 3rd. Next week is when star ratings are going to be dropped for 2025. And so essentially...
Let me interject and say that universally across the board, and that's not just Humana, but maybe with the exception of one big, large carrier that everybody knows, most of these carriers are going to see an overall across-the-board drop in star ratings.
Yeah. So they are. And I think that's what I want to talk about is I at least appreciate it from an investor perspective a week before they drop, instead of it just being... SMF, hey, everybody, surprise. They were like, hey, you know what? We want to get ahead of this by a week. We want to let you know exactly what's happening. We want to prep you for this. This is what's coming, and this is what we're doing. We're working on it. We already know about it. I appreciate that from an investor perspective. And anything in the industry, I always say if there's going to be bad news, I would rather you tell me about it ahead of time and be transparent about it and let me formulate a plan, a strategy, and be in the know instead of be caught off guard. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that approach that they did with it. And to your point, I think what you're really seeing from CMS in talking about all of the turbulence and everything is, look, these bonuses, I think from their perspective, and again, this is, Dan, just my opinion of what I think these regulators and people at CMS perceive and think is like, well, these bonuses were supposed to be bonuses for people really kicking butt and performing really well. And it's gotten to a point over the years with stars and HEDIS and caps and everything to where you have 90-something% of plans getting bonuses. And they're going, apparently it's been too easy to achieve these bonuses. We've got to make it more difficult for these carriers to get these bonuses. So I think that that's more what you're seeing, and it's a cost savings mechanism for them as well. And so they've kind of moved the goalpost a little bit further for carriers to achieve those higher star ratings.
Well, it's just like any other principle in business, right? Like when there's less funding overall, it's how do you save money? Well, maybe we need to evaluate all these bonuses we're paying out. Maybe we've been a little bit too generous on it. It's a classic thing, even in the corporate world. If you are a sales rep and you're killing your quota all the time, what do? They adjust your quota, right? They raise your bar. If you're consistently over-indexing and you're overperforming, then leadership and management goes, this is easier than we thought. Let's adjust those quotas up, right?
Correct. But it's a universal principle.
Yes.
And also, let's talk about clawbacks. How much bitching do we get about agents on their clawbacks or chargebacks? I mean, I've always heard about it, right? Everybody knows.
Always something.
But guess what? Even carriers are getting it. So we're talking about these overpayments. There's millions and millions of dollars that CMS is clawing back from carriers from even previous years in these bonus payments right now.
We were talking about that even last year on the early episodes of our podcast.
Yep.
It's happening now.
Yeah, to compound things even worse, you're entering a bad environment. They're doing the clawbacks now on some of those overpayments, and now they're saying, hey, we're making it more difficult. And the reason that, again, the 4-star component is really critical is because the move from 3.5 to 4 stars, that's that step, is the 4 stars is where you get a double bonus. And there's a lot of counties throughout the country where it's twice as impactful from a financial perspective to go from 3.5 to 4. And that's like that creme de la creme. That's like that big indicator. It's a big difference. And so I think that that's why it's of importance to talk about. But again,
and with a big carrier like Humana, it makes it's like that downward spiral, right? You got to like stop the bleeding, and now you have all of a sudden less cash to work with. Things are even harder for you, and you've got to get really scrappy and really kind of right the ship and turn it around, So
which I think
they will. Yeah.
They're smart. They're great. They know what they're doing. They're going to do it. But, but I will say that, and it's not isolated to them, right? So just be prepared next week when all the star ratings come out, that you're probably going to see a lot of plans degrading their star rating, going from 3.5 to 3, or from 4 to 3.5, or 5-star to 4.5.
Well, we already know specifically. Can we? I don't know. We don't talk specifics, but we already know of 5-star plans that are for sure getting downgraded.
Yeah.
We already know 4.5.
No specifics yet, because if this drops on Monday and it's not public till Friday.
4.5 plans that are getting dropped, and we've had pretty consistent communication, even from the carriers who are generally known for having higher performance and higher star ratings and good customer satisfaction. This is impacting even them.
Right.
And so, yes, all the carriers that you think I'm talking about, those are the ones that we're talking about, and you'll know by the time you probably hear this.
Yeah. And again, it all matters, because it's not so much if you understand the industry more, and it's not about, oh my gosh, is this plan quality? So when I go to make a sale to a consumer, I'm pitching that they have the best customer service or X, or Y, or Z. It matters from a funding perspective, because at the end of the day, that insurance company is going to get less money. And what are their decisions going to be based on that? Is it going to be that they cut and reorg the broker managers from 5 states and reorg it into 3, and you have a virtual broker manager that you deal with now? Or is it going to be that they, cut back the hours and the services of their agent and broker support unit? Is it going to be that they cut back and scale back on some of their technology? Is it good? So again, you just have to understand that all these things matter, and that leadership at that company is going to make hard decisions to account for that. So,
Yeah. So again, it's just real business principles are going to apply. Carriers are going to keep trying to sharpen the pencil wherever they can, cut costs wherever they can, be frugal, and try to get back into a better footing, into a growth situation financially over these next year or two.
Yeah.
And really, we didn't even get into a lot of the other headwinds. We were kind of talking before about overall this year, because of we hypothesized, especially because it's a special year where there's an event that is very impactful. There's a lot of things that are kind of being held together by Band-Aids and toothpicks and duct tape, that, the wheels could potentially fall off a few of these things going into next year. And the funding environment for 2026 overall could even be much worse than it is for this year. And I think that is going to be how it is.
Right.
And so no matter who's in office, what leadership we have, that's going to be a situation and a challenge for them to deal with.
Well, and I'm just already going to say this. I have already heard from industry people who are very in the know that it is right now October 3rd. We're going to get a call letter here in 30 days. I mean,
maybe less.
We're in November. I've heard we're going to get another call letter for 2026. And so here over the next couple of weeks, I mean, we're going to be talking about AEP. We have a few guests. We have some other things upcoming. But before you know it, we're going to be right back into the trenches of talking about another call letter here pretty quick. So that's also, and to your point, a lot more coming and happening. And just like this last year, we found that it was very, very, very impactful. And all the brokers and agents and agencies were all head down. They're working. They're trying to save their books of business. They're trying to make money and grow their business, service their clients. And
remember when we used to have easy times of the year?
Yeah. And instead, this was like in the peripheral, and they weren't paying attention to it. And I think it's going to be, again, the same scenario this year. And to your point, I think these carriers I think some of the carriers are being brave. I think they're like putting their best foot forward and trying to preserve really good benefits. And they're trying to, make the financials work and really be competitive with their offerings and support the agent community and their consumers. And I, in general, would just say, like, I'm impressed by the carriers and the insurance companies and how well they're seeming to manage and navigate just the steaming pile of crap that they have gotten, over the last year. And I'm impressed with it. But I do think that maybe some of them are being a little naive. I mean, we talked about some carriers who are completely exiting the MA space, and they're just like, hey, we can't make the numbers work now. We're not going to be able to make the numbers work next year or the year after that, so we're just going to pull our product. And I think that we're going to see it next year. Like, if things don't significantly change or something massive doesn't happen, things will get uglier, and we're going to be in another chaotic year looking at carriers who are doing plan exits and sunsetting because of profitability and environments. And like I said, I think there's a lot of plans that carriers didn't want to be too brash. You know, I think there's a lot of areas where they said, look, we took 10 years to build and develop this marketplace. We don't want to pull it yet. And I think that next year that's going to be like, oh, we really tried. We don't want to cut it, but we're just going to have to, you know? So that's what I'm thinking about for 2026.
Yeah. We got a couple other industry news things I wanted to get to. Maybe we can real quickly. Health Sherpa just announced that they finally came out with their Medicare enrollment tool. When I say finally like that, I don't mean it like it took them forever. We've known it was coming. We've
been in development mode.
We helped them dev some stuff out. We consulted. We have a fantastic relationship with all of the other enrollment platforms in the market, like Sunfire. But competition is a good thing, and they have a little bit different model on this enrollment tool, where it's a couple things that are unique about what Health Sherpa is trying to do, just like they do on the ACA side, which is it's FMO agnostic,
right?
Which I think is, if it can function really great, is an amazing thing, because a lot of times people complain about they're split with FMOs between Sunfire, right, and really because of how Sunfire works, how it has to go through your contracted
or connection DRX
upline.
Or,
Same thing.
Yeah.
You're split with a different login. And
but that also comes down to who's paying the bill, right?
Yep.
And the cost mechanism and how their models work. And so it's not really, to be fair, it's not really because the FMO is just a jerk. It's like, they can't pay for a service or a tool that they have no means to recoup the revenue on.
Yeah, we have an annual SaaS fee with carriers, like Sunfire and Connecture, and then you pay per application that you submit for each of your agents. And it's not an insignificant cost to an FMO. It's a very substantial, it's, as far as tech stacks, I think it's our most expensive, if not close to our most expensive expenditure.
Not anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, not anymore.
I ran the numbers, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, fortunately or unfortunately there. So, Health Sherpa is trying to have it be FMO agnostic, so you can just, plug in your riding numbers with those carriers and submit. The other thing is there's no cost to the agents or FMOs. They're monetizing it and billing it on the back end to the carriers upon submission, like they do, on the ACA side of things, which I actually really like that model. At the end of the day, FMOs are making the smallest margin out of that equation, but yet we've been the one funding the enrollment submission there. So we'll see how that plays out. But that was kind of some big industry news that dropped this week as well.
Yep, and then a couple just notes before we wrap with our final kind of chat that I want to go through is we did get some contracts kind of late in the year. We don't have every single contract out there, but we do have a lot of the top FMO contracts. Some of note that we just recently got
on the ACA and Medicare side. That's really what makes us different. Is usually you see somebody big on one or the others.
Yeah, and we've really invested into both. And so, anyways, we did get the Anthem WellPoint. Or excuse me, I shouldn't say Anthem, Elevance, right? Elevance, Wellaby, and WellPoint ACA contract, which is big because of how much that Wellaby product is expanding into a lot of other markets, not just Florida and Texas, but others as well. So if that's a contract that you're looking for, hit us up. We got you. In addition to the Ambetters and the National Aetna and all the other ACA carriers that we have. So that one is very significant because we think they're going to be very competitive.
Really like their team, on the ACA side especially as well. So.
Absolutely. So it's actually been really enjoyable for me to start, building a lot of new relationships on the ACA side too. And we've really, put a lot of time and effort into those relationships over these last couple of years.
Yeah, I think a lot of these carriers, like Elevance specifically in this contract, are doing things with the GAs now smarter than, some of the when Medicare was coming up, right? It was kind of like, give out contracts to everybody, and it doesn't matter if you have office space or a contracting team or a compliance officer or infrastructure. Whoever's writing some business will sling out these contracts to. Right. And it seems like the ACA carriers have learned from that journey a little bit, and they're going out and,
trying to preserve contract integrity.
Exactly. Making more informed strategic decisions about big national partners that are deserving of it versus, you know, some flash in the pan.
Well, not only that,
smaller brokerages.
but I think they're assessing the value that they're getting for the dollars that they're paying out, because a lot of those people are just, you know, grouping up or glomming together to just have more volume. And so, but they're going to write the business anyway, right? And so that's to the point is like, what are they really getting for it? So I think they've been smart about that. I'd also mention Golden Rule. We just got the Golden Rule contract, which I think is amazing. Shout out to them, because that is a product that is, you know, cradle to grave. We can, you know, obviously use that for our brokers, agents, and agency partners on the under 65 to fill in gaps, to use as ancillaries, as well as the 65 plus, and it's embedded in part of the quoting platforms. So I think that's really, really huge. So that's another big shout out. So if you need that one too, hit us up on the Golden Rule too. The other thing really I just thought that I want to talk about too is more that we're into AEP. We're pre-AEP, you know, October 3rd, but we're already, to your point, seeing what's happening, our strategies play out. And just so that you know, we should talk about how we really go through and metric out our AEP and how we track our run rates and how we really make sure that we're staying on task and delivering results, how we make adjustments so that listeners can kind of adopt that and maybe use that in a similar way for their own book of business.
Yeah.
You know, a little bit.
So, well, we do it a couple different ways, right? We basically divide, on the Medicare side of things, we divide our production into two sides, right? Virtual and field.
Same with ACA.
Same with ACA. And then we basically go to our carriers and find out.
So to get more granular, we kind of go, okay, how many apps do we actually think we are going to write?
Or do we need to write to hit our goals, our commits with these carriers?
Exactly. So what's our total number? What percentage is going to be written by our internal, like our W-2 channel? How much is going to be written by our virtual captive agents or our, you know, LOA agents? And how much is going to be written by external brokers and sub-agency partners?
And we know that, you know, historically, our field will write an over-index on certain carriers, and our virtual teams will over-index on some carriers remotely as well. And then we do have more latitude and control over our virtual teams, where we can target and identify and produce in different states for different carriers where we need to kind of fill in the gaps.
Yep. And one of the things that is reliable and good about those forecasts, but also challenging, is when we've had partners or agents for a number of years, you start to see trends and behaviors. And so you really kind of know their capabilities and what they'll deliver. So you might have an agent partner who we really appreciate, that's awesome, that is like, hey, I'm going to write 200 apps, and you look up their 3-year history of what they're going to write, and you're like, yeah, this year they wrote 180, then they wrote 220, they wrote yeah, they're probably on par, close to their projections. But then sometimes you'll have folks who are like, yeah, I'm going to write 350 apps, and you look at their 3-year history and they've only written 50, and you just go, I think you're going to write 50, you know? So it's very easy for us to take like their forecast, but then also look at their past production. And you can obviously look at new opportunities or things within their business plan or opportunities that might change it, but you can be pretty close on your forecasts. What you don't know is all the new partners and growth you've brought in through this year. You know, you don't have like really a preview or like a history of what they've written. And sometimes you've been working with them for 3 or 6 months, but their contracts haven't been aligned to us as a partner yet. So we've just been waiting for like contracting rules, blackout periods for us to start seeing the data. And so those are the situations that are the gray area that we have a hard time forecasting.
Yeah. So for what I do, you know, I can look at our historicals and I'll take the past 3 years, you know, almost like algorithmically, and go, this is how much we've written with these channels to these purposes or for these teams. Here's how much we've grown this year to date. We're up X amount of percentage year over year. So if you times that number by your historicals, you can get a pretty accurate projection of where we're going to be as far as growth. And then what we do is we go to all our teams. For example, we'll go to the field teams, and we have a pretty good idea, like Dan said. A leopard doesn't change their spots too often, so to say. Now, both on all these teams and with agents and agencies, there's always dark horses, right? You always have people that you don't really expect much from that surprise you. And then you also have people
just like fantasy football.
Yeah. It's like life. It's like anything else. You have people that you have higher expectations for, and
like, dude, my freaking guy got
something
injured.
happens. It's like, bro, I drafted you high, and you freaking crapped the bed for me.
You got injured. Yeah. Now you're not getting me any points, man. Like
now I gotta adjust my goals over here. I gotta find somebody else, and so you try to extrapolate.
Like, I got this waiver wire guy that is killing it.
Yeah, and there's always those new dark horses. So then on the virtual sides, we have a few different models. We have our W2 channel. Then we have a couple LOA independent channels, and then we have our almost like field agents that we call our Medicare advocates team, that are basically really, I like to consider them kind of like the special forces. They're probably I would say they're as high acumen of a group of Medicare selling agents as anybody across the country.
I agree.
Full independent, sell in most states, fairly large team. And then we go through and we break down.
But they understand medical groups. They understand everything from field sales and teledigital sales.
They own their own policies.
Yeah, really.
They do a great job. And then we'll go to each one of those teams and we'll kind of divide out and allocate what we can, based on historical projections or historical numbers, and we'll kind of extrapolate out where those numbers need to land. And then we'll go down to our team leaders and our supervisors, and we'll basically break out and divide out those goals. And then they'll go to each one of those team members and agents and performers and say, hey, this is kind of like, what are your goals? And we'll get goals from them. And then we'll all circle up, and then we'll kind of, take what their goals are based on what we know.
Yep.
And then kind of land on like what we can expect from those teams. And we've got pretty good at it year over year to where we have a fairly good idea to know where we can commit for these carriers and production. And of course, there's always variables. This year, there's more variables, I think, that are going to benefit us as things kind of start playing out in the market. It seems like we're trending for slightly better than the past couple of years already, plus all of our growth. So I think, just like we've been talking all year, I think we're headed for a great AEP and OEP.
Super AEP, as I call it.
Yep. Yeah, the super AEP.
So I think that's important, but just so that everybody knows too, we're extrapolating out and forecasting those goals all the way down to a single NPN within our entire ecosystem. And then when we also have agents who we classify as to like how much business they write, we'll also group together some of the lower producing agents and say, hey, here's this unknown area. Here's this area of,
we call them the bonus category.
A couple hundred agents that we don't know how much business they're going to bring us, but let's at least go very conservative with the numbers we think and average it across these NPNs. And let's, again, if we really crush it, it's going to be because this bonus category of agents who have not been very active, that we really can't get firm commitments from, that we can't get communication with, if they actually, some of them end up doing really well, then that is all completely bonus. And we don't really calculate in those reps into our forecasts typically.
Yeah. And then that way, if we miss or something, or our reliable channels are not hitting the targets, that can almost kind of offset that a little bit. But we don't plan on kind of the gravy, the bonus category there of grouping of agents. So that's kind of a peek behind there. But just like Dan said about fantasy football and a sports team, each agent, whether you think it's important or not,
right,
it all rolls up, right? And some of you are like, well, I'm independent, I work for myself, I don't really care. Well, in aggregate, each carrier, they do the same thing we just described, where most of them have a very set firm number where they know per ready to sell NPN, they can expect X amount of apps in that market.
Correct.
And so they just extrapolate that data out too. And so if you're out there, licensed ready to sell agent, and then you end up producing nothing, you miss the mark for the carriers, you miss the mark for your FMOs and things like that.
So I want to add this, the terminology that you need to learn, it's called your run rate. A lot of the carriers call it your run rate, and they know the numbers. So again, and you have an AEP, just so that everybody knows, like it's almost like a bell curve. Like you have this pre-enrollment period right now of October 1st through 15th, which you should be out there, as we said many times, be doing sales presentations, talking to clients, preserving, working with your book of business, doing all these activities. A broker should be so freaking busy right now like that it's October 15th. There should be no delineation of like your effort and activity level right now versus October 15th, period. If you're not busy right now, you're not doing a good job.
Yeah, and we did a big, I think we did a better training this year than we'd ever done before. And I've averaged it out over the past 3 years, and agents are writing about 17 to 20% of their overall AEP sales during this October 1st through the 15th period. Right. And of course, we're not taking applications, we're not taking submissions, we're you know, but you can pre-up and do those appointments and queue those apps up ready to go for the 15th. And so, say for example, if you want to write 100 enrollments, you need to have 20 essentially queued up, ready to go, ready to be submitted, and verifying with those clients as of October 15th. In order for you to hit your, like Dan described, the run rate of hitting that 100 apps.
So that run rate is every day throughout AEP, and you have to calculate the working dates. For us, we even go specifically into allocating half days and stuff from overtime hours to Saturdays and everything else into those forecasts. And to your point, that run rate, the carriers do the same way. They know within a week of AEP. So by the time you have your pre-AEP that Mike was talking about, and how you should have all those applications to submit, you know, and really, again, there's a compliant way to do it and a non-compliant way to do it. Don't be the agent out there that's sandbagging and writing applications on October 5th and 7th and keeping them in your satchel, and then you're going to be faxing them in on the 15th non-compliantly. There's just better ways to do it. You know, like you talk to your clients, show them plans, show them like, you know, do the needs analysis, get them on the right plan, talk to them about it, and then just kind of set the table like, hey, I'm going to call you back on the 15th or the 16th, and we'll just get this taken care of here in a few minutes.
Confirm that you're still good to go to submit this.
Yep. Do it the right way, but you should be submitting a ton of applications for those first couple of days with your clients. And then from there, it's that run rate. So about a week into, from the 15th to about the 22nd, 23rd of October, you really have a good baseline established of your run rate, and the carriers do too. And they already know, like we do, all those, it's like a set of dominoes. They all just keep falling. And you just know exactly how the rest of your AEP is going to play out by about that point. So
yeah, I was going to, I shared this tracker, then the camera can see that you won't get any detail on it. But basically what it's done is it divides out the workable days every AEP by your goal.
Yep.
And you plug in your daily sales, and it tells you where you're at in relation to your runway to hit your goals. And so it was something that I always used personally when I knew, hey, if I want to write, you know, let's say 200 during this annual enrollment, then I need to average X amount per day. And so if I'm able to submit the 1st through the 15th, my pre-queued up enrollments, I had a good head start there. And then I just knew that I had to maintain my average run rate in order to hit my goal. And if I was ahead of time, maybe I could, you know, take some time off early that day and go do whatever I need to do with my kids or my family. If I was behind, I needed to work a little bit of extra time. I needed to try to catch up on those apps. I needed to put in some times on Saturdays or whenever I needed to.
Exactly.
And those are the practices and the habits that you, and frankly, the sacrifices that you have to be willing to make during this time of annual enrollment if you really want to hit the goals that you want.
Yeah, you hit on a lot of them that I was going to talk about because we're always on the same wavelength about managing that time and what you do when you're behind your goal. And also remember that it's going to be really busy in the month of October because, again, this year especially, there's going to be that week or two during that time in November that people are highly distracted to and they're maybe not focused on it, so it becomes slower and more difficult for you to reach your audience and help them enroll in plans. And then it's always a little bit slower around the week of Thanksgiving. You know, you have Black Friday and the day before Thanksgiving, which is kind of a hard day. So you have to account for that. And then, of course, the last week of AEP is crazy busy, typically with all the procrastinators. So you have these ebbs and flows of that annual enrollment period that you have to account for. And to be safe, you want to be ahead of your run rate to account for your accretion, your disenrollments, your people who change their mind, you know, and also you want to be ahead just in case you are trying to retain your book of business and you don't do as good as you thought you would and you're losing some of your clients coming out the back door. You want to overperform on your new sales as well. So those are just other things that I talk about keeping in mind when you're forecasting out, when you're doing your run rate, and you're trying to stay on track with everything.
Yeah, and I think as we describe that, and as I've described it before, you know, people a lot of times are critical, and they're like, oh, well, you know, you're just going to sell out and you're not going to spend any time with your family and your kids and whatnot. And, you know, we went through this for years and years and years. And I don't ever remember, you know, I don't think for sure, I know my kids would not describe me as a derelict, non-present father, you know, there are definitely times in rhythm and balance in your life where, you know, Dan's wife knew, my wife knew, annual enrollment's coming up. I'm going to be up early and I'm going to be out late and I'm going to be home and I'm going to spend a lot of time with you right leading up into it. And when we get, you know, when AEP wraps up, I'm going to go on a vacation and we're going to live a life that we built, that I sacrificed for.
Celebrate the victories.
Celebrate the wins, you know, and some of the other things definitely during those times of annual enrollment were sacrificed. Maybe, you know, time at the gym, personal time, fun time, things like that. But, you know, your priorities are your priorities, and you can still work hard and be efficient with your time without absolutely just, you know, letting your personal life go to pot. And I think that's you know, frankly, that's an excuse. I think that a lot of people, a crutch that they rely on, knowing that they don't want to put in that time and that hard work. Agreed.
So anyways, I think hopefully that helps providing you with a little more behind the scenes. And there's more. I mean, I think that there's more information, like with meeting with, you know, my controller and our marketing department, and really when we get granular in how we do everything. But that at least gives you all somewhat of an idea of the exercise we go through and why. And there's kind of more, I guess you would say, the science and the art behind hitting our numbers. And I would always say that I've done a good job of, you know, of always, you know, over delivering. You know, I never want to commit and have these giant numbers that are unachievable. I've always done a great job of being conservative with my forecasts, with my numbers. And I pride myself on being able to be somebody and a partner that carriers can depend on to help them hit their goals. And we're going to continue to do that, you know. So I would much rather be that person that they're pleasantly surprised with and happy about the results than somebody who's always just letting people down.
That same philosophy goes for you agents out there and agencies. You know, if you're asking these carriers for co-op or your FMO, and you take them to the shed, so to say, and really squeeze them for a lot of money, and then you don't deliver, that's a one and done, right? And you have shown yourself to be a partner that they can't trust and rely on, and you're a bad business expense. And so you might have made that one-time money grab, but it's better to, you know, even like
enjoy
Dan
it
said,
while it lasted.
Undershoot and over-deliver, and it'll pay off time and time again consistently with those partners. And that's just a good policy overall in business, not just in this industry in particular.
Yep. I think that's it's enough for today. We'll wrap, but catch you back next week.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Agent Boost.